single word: marathon. It echoes through 2.5 millennia, not just as the name of a grueling foot race, but as the symbol of an impossible victory. In 490 BC, on this very plain, the history of the world was held in balance. On one side, the Persian Empire, the largest, most powerful, and most technologically advanced war machine the world had ever seen. An empire stretching from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea. On the other, a small, fledgling democracy, Athens, so insignificant that many in the Persian court couldn't even place it on a map. The Persian force was an invading armada, sent by King Darius the Great with a simple, brutal instruction: to burn Athens to the ground. And yet, when the sun set on that fateful day, it was the invincible Persian army that was broken, fleeing in terror to its ships, leaving thousands of its dead on the sands. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a humiliation. How? How did a small band of citizen soldiers defy and destroy the fist of a global superpower? The answer isn't simple, and it's not what you think. It's a story of genius, desperation, and one of the single greatest tactical errors in military history. To understand why the Persians fell, we must first understand why they came. This was not a war of conquest. Not yet. This was a punitive expedition. Years earlier, Athens had committed the unforgivable sin. They had aided the Ionian Greeks in a rebellion against Persian rule, culminating in the burning of the Persian regional capital, Sardis. King Darius, it is said, was so enraged that he had a servant whisper in his ear at every meal, "Master, remember the Athenians." In 490 BC, his vengeance arrived. The fleet, commanded by the skilled admiral Datis and the king's own nephew, Artapernes, had already destroyed the city of Erechtsir, which had also aided the revolt. Athens was next. They landed at the Bay of Marathon, a spot chosen by Hippias, the deposed Athenian tyrant who was now advising the Persians. It was perfect for their needs. A large, flat plain, ideal for their most devastating weapon, the cavalry. In Athens, panic. The Spartans, their powerful allies, refused to come, citing a religious festival. They wouldn't arrive until the full moon, days too late. The Athenians were alone, save for a small, heroic contingent of 1,000 soldiers from the tiny city of Plataea. The Athenian assembly was split. Some argued for barricading the city to withstand a siege. Others, led by the charismatic and battle-hardened general Miltiades, argued for the unthinkable, to march out and meet the Persian superpower on the field. Miltiades, who had lived under Persian rule, knew them. He knew their strengths, but more importantly, he knew their weaknesses. His argument won. 10,000 Athenian hoplites, along with their Plataean allies, marched to Marathon. For 8 days, the two armies stared each other down. The tiny Greek force blocked the roads to Athens, while the massive Persian army camped by their ships. The stalemate was tense, and it was a situation that Persians, far from home and with a long supply line, could not afford. The question wasn't if a battle would happen, but how it would be fought. And the how is the key to the why of the Persian defeat. The first reason for the Persian failure was a catastrophic technological and doctrinal mismatch. We tend to think of the Persian army as a uniform mass, but it was a multi-ethnic, conscripted force. The core was Persian and Median infantry, but it also included Sakai, Egyptians, and others, all with different fighting styles. The standard Persian infantryman was a sparabara, lightly armored with padded linen or cloth, carrying a large but brittle wicker shield called a spara, a short spear, and a dagger. Their primary tactic was sound: plant the spara in the ground to form a shield wall, from behind which masses of archers would unleash a sky-blackening storm of arrows. This was designed to decimate an enemy before they ever got close. This doctrine was built to fight other lightly armored Eastern armies. It had never met the Greek Hoplite. The Athenian was, fundamentally, a citizen soldier. He wasn't a conscript, he was fighting for his land, his family, and his polis city-state. And he had paid for his own equipment, which was the most advanced of its day. The Hoplite was a walking tank. His helmet, cuirass, and greaves were all solid bronze. His shield, the aspis, was a 3-foot-wide, concave dish of wood and bronze, carried on the forearm, leaving his hand free to grip his weapon. His primary weapon was the dory, a 9-foot spear with an iron head and a bronze butt spike. In formation, they were a phalanx sand-interlocking wall of shields and spears. The Persian aerostorm, so terrifying to others, was rendered largely ineffective by the massive bronze shields and helmets. And if the phalanx reached the Persian line, a line of wicker shields and cloth armor, the result was preordained. It was a confrontation of steel versus wicker, bronze versus cloth. In a close-quarters brawl, the Persian infantrymen stood no chance. The very ground the Persians chose for their victory became a prison. Marathon was a long, flat plain, but it was not without its dangers. It was hemmed in by mountains on one side and the sea on the other. Crucially, the ends of the plain dissolved into marshes, one large marsh to the north and a smaller one to the south. When the Athenians and Platons marched down from the hills, they didn't charge. They took up a strategic position at the southern end of the plain, their flanks protected by the terrain and by lines of abaty-felled trees with sharpened branches. They blocked the main road to Athens. This presented Datis and Artaparnus with a dilemma. The 11,000 Greeks were dug in. Attacking them uphill in their fortified position would be suicide, even for the Persian host. But the Persians couldn't just sit there. An army of perhaps 40,000 men, the exact number is debated, but it was vastly larger than the Greek force, and thousands of horses requires a staggering amount of food and fresh water. Every day they waited, they depleted their supplies, and the risk of disease in the swampy August heat grew. The Athenians, by contrast, were on home turf, easily resupplied. Miltiades, by blocking the exits, had turned the Persians' intended battlefield into a cage. The strategic situation was now in Athens' favor. The Persians had to make a move, and that move would be their undoing. This is the linchpin, the one singular element that made the Battle of Marathon possible. The core of the Persian striking force wasn't its infantry, it was its cavalry. Persian heavy cavalry was the terror of the ancient world. They were the shock and awe weapon that could shatter infantry formations and ride down fleeing enemies. The Marathon plain was chosen specifically for them. The Athenian phalanx, while unstoppable from the front, was slow, cumbersome, and incredibly vulnerable on its flanks and rear. A hoplite phalanx caught in the open by heavy cavalry would be a massacre. For 8 days, the cavalry was a looming threat, pinning the Greeks to the hills. And then, on the night before the battle, they vanished. Historians have debated this for centuries, but the most compelling and logical theory, supported by ancient sources, is that Datis made a fateful decision. Frustrated by the stalemate, he decided to split his forces. He would re-embark a significant portion of his army, including his irreplaceable cavalry, onto the ships. Why? To sail around the Attic Peninsula and attack Athens directly from the sea at the Bay of Phaleron, while the Athenian army was pinned at Marathon. It was a complex, but strategically sound, plan. Horses are difficult to transport. They would have to be loaded first, likely under the cover of darkness. But the Athenians were watching. Ionian scouts, or perhaps a signal, alerted the Greek generals. As the dawn broke on that 9th day, Miltiades received the electrifying news. The cavalry is away. This was the moment. The Persian army was divided. Its most fearsome weapon was floating uselessly in the Aegean, and the infantry left on the beach was vulnerable. It was a window of opportunity that might last only a few hours. Miltiades, who had been arguing for an attack all week, seized it. The time for waiting was over. Now Miltiades faced a new problem. Even without the cavalry, the Persian infantry line was vast. Herodotus tells us it was as long as the Greek line. For the 11,000 Greeks to match the front of a much larger army, Miltiades had to make a dangerous, counterintuitive gamble. The standard phalanx was 8 ranks deep, a solid block of men. Miltiades didn't have the numbers. To stretch his line and prevent the Persians from simply walking around his flanks, he thinned his center. He drew men from the middle ranks, making them only a few men deep and dangerously weak. Where did he put those men? He loaded his flanks, making them exceptionally strong and deep, perhaps 16 ranks, or more. The right flank was commanded by Callimachus, the Polemarch war archon, and the left flank was held by the heroic Plataeans. This formation was a brilliant, desperate masterpiece. Miltiades was inviting the Persians to break his center. He knew his best troops were on the flanks, and he knew the Persians traditionally placed their best troops in the center. He was setting a trap, anticipating that the Persian elite would punch through his weak middle, only to be enveloped by his powerful, reinforced wings. And then, he gave the most radical order of all. The two armies were separated by no less than 8 stades, about a mile of flat ground. The Persian archers were waiting, arrows nocked. To walk slowly across that plain would be to be pink cushioned by tens of thousands of arrows. So, Miltiades ordered the unthinkable. The phalanx, 11,000 men encased in 50 pounds of bronze, was ordered to run. This had never been done. It was insane, but it was also genius. By running the last stretch, they would cross the archers' killing zone in just a few minutes, minimizing casualties and, crucially, hitting the Persian line with a terrifying, earth-shaking momentum. It was the first time the Persians had ever seen a phalanx charge at a run. In Herodotus reports, they thought the Athenians had been seized by a self-destructive madness. The battle unfolded exactly as Miltiades had planned. The Greek phalanx, screaming its war cry, slammed into the Persian line. The impact was cataclysmic. On the flanks, the fight was over almost immediately. The heavily armored Athenians and Platons, deep and powerful, smashed through the conscripted, lightly armored troops on the Persian wings. Those Persian flanks, composed of less reliable troops, broke and fled in terror, many of them running into the northern marsh where they drowned. But in the center, the trap was sprung. As Miltiades had predicted, the Persian Elitha, Medes and Saki were more than a match for the thin Greek center. They held their ground, then pushed back, breaking the Greek line and driving the Athenians inland. For the Persians, this must have looked like victory. Their center was winning, and the Greek line was broken. But as they pursued the retreating Athenians, they exposed their own flanks, and then the trap snapped shut. The victorious Greek wings, under the iron-hard discipline of their commanders, did not pursue the enemies they had routed. In one of the most brilliant maneuvers in ancient warfare, they stopped, turned inward, and charged, hitting the exposed flanks of the victorious Persian center. The Persian elite, who thought they had won, suddenly found themselves attacked from 3 sides by the remnants of the Greek center to their front, and by the full, crushing weight of the Greek flanks on both sides. This was no longer a battle, it was a slaughter. The double envelopment was total. The Persians, crowded together, unable to use their bows, their wicker shields shattering, were cut down in their hundreds. The Persian line didn't just break. It evaporated. A wave of panic swept the army. The survivors turned and fled the 3 miles back to their ships, with the Athenians in hot pursuit. The Hoplites, enraged, fighting for their homes, gave no quarter. The final, bloody act was fought in the surf, as the Greeks tried to set fire to the Persian ships, hacking at the Persians as they tried to scramble aboard. The Athenians captured 7 ships, but the rest of the fleet, carrying Datis, Artapernis, and the now useless cavalry, pulled away, leaving 6,400 of their dead on the plain of Marathon. The Athenians had lost only 192 men. So, why did the Persian forces fall at Marathon? It was not one single cause, but a perfect storm of failure, arrogance, and ingenuity. They were defeated, first, by a logistical and doctrinal mismatch. Their wicker and cloth army was designed to fight a different kind of war, and it shattered against the bronze and steel of the Hoplite phalanx. They were defeated by geography. Their chosen battlefield became a cage, forcing them into a fatal error. They were defeated decisively by their own commanders. Datis's decision to re-embark his cavalry, the one weapon that could have guaranteed his victory, was a catastrophic blunder that gave the Athenians their one and only chance. And finally, they were defeated by Athenian audacity. They were defeated by the genius of Miltiades, who saw that one fleeting chance and seized it, gambling everything on a radical plantha-thinned center, the loaded flanks. And they were defeated by the 11,000 men who were willing to run a mile in full armor, to crash into an army that outnumbered them, and to fight with the discipline to turn from a route to spring a trap. Marathon was not the end of the Persian Wars. The Persians would be back, 10 years later, in far greater numbers. But it was the beginning of the end. It was the moment that a tiny democracy proved that the unbeatable empire was human and could be made to bleed. It was a victory, not just of weapons, but of an idea that free men, fighting for their own homes, could overcome the subjects of a distant king. The legacy of that day is immeasurable. The news was famously carried to Athens by a runner, Phidippides, who shouted Nike, victory, before collapsing dead, giving us the marathon race. But the real legacy was the birth of Athenian confidence. This victory, this marathon spirit, would fuel their golden age. It gave them the belief that would lead them to victory again at Salamis, and would usher in the era of Pericles, of philosophy, of democracy, of the Parthenon. The world we live in today, the very foundations of Western thought, was in many ways forged in the blood and dust of that small plain. The Persians fell, and in their place, an idea was allowed to rise. The Persian wars were far from over. Marathon was just round one. 10 years later, King Xerxes, Darius's son, would return with an army so vast it was said to drink rivers dry. And that would lead to the legendary stand of the 300 Spartans. If you want to know what happened when the full, unrestrained power of the Persian Empire returned to Greece, let me know in the comments below. And we'll dive into the story of Thermopylae and Salamis. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the greatest battles in history.